ever since we had this coronavirus wave in our country, there's been that talk of lives versus livelihoods. Now we're having that talk about education versus the lives of students. Where would you put your money on that conversation?
I think it's a balance that ought to be struck. You have to strike a balance between prolonged closure of schools, which has its own consequences on the child and on students. You have to balance that with protection measures. And I agree with Victor that while it is indeed okay for us to open schools, the plan must be sensible. And I think that is what has been missing from the Ministry of Education at the top, because I believe we have experts in that ministry, but the leadership of the ministry has been problematic right from the start. I think there was a time we were analyzing Magohas' decisions. On one hand, he says learning is going on. On the other hand, he turns around and says, no, there is no learning going on. We have stopped all online learning or virtual learning. And this kind of erratic decisions have really cost our preparation towards us opening school. And when you look at what the ministry is talking about, the ministry is not being realistic. And I agree with Victor that some of the things that the ministry and the minister, the cabinet secretary, is talking about are things that are not actual on the ground. And I wonder what he was doing walking around the country, because if he indeed was taking statistics and looking at what is the situation in public schools especially, then he would have realized that it is not possible to do the things that he's talking about. The other day we had the president say that the government was going to construct 12,000 new schools or thereabout. That has not begun. And we're talking about schools opening on January 4th. Where will these 12,000 classrooms come from within 1 month if the government has not begun building those classrooms? So there are things that are not going to work. And now that we have seen one student has already died, several have been infected. I remember mentioning on this show that if any student will be infected, or God forbid, now that it has already happened, one dies, that will be on the head of Magoha.
Victor, the health ministry says we have COVID-19 is here to stay. We have to learn on how to accommodate it and live with it. The education ministry says January 4th it is, all students must go back to school. Now this means one of two things. Either because of the social distancing guidelines, we need more classrooms or less pupils back to school. Now I foresee a scenario where it's going to be very chaotic going back to school, or otherwise parents will, instead of being back to school, it will be backs to school, because very many parents are not likely to send their kids to a scenario that is not very safe. What would you think about that?
No, that is why I'm questioning the logic behind the opening of the schools. Because when you tell me that COVID is still around, and that one I'm confident about, based on research, based on my studies, I can confirm that COVID is not running away anytime soon.
Yeah.
And as you put it, we need to learn to live around with the disease. It's a new normal. But it's a new normal that we must contain intelligently and reasonably. So it means whatever we do must be very practical on the ground. When you say that we are going to have a full reopening of these schools, then it must be full reopening that must ensure that it adheres to the health protocols that are given by the ministry. That is one. Two, ensure that apart from just telling us that each and every school is next to a hospital, which is a lie, tell us that the sick bays and the clinics within schools, because we are sure each and every single school has a sick bay. And must have a clinic within the school. So ensure that they are fully operational, because in some schools they are not functional. So ensure that that happens. Then, if time allows, which it must allow, because then it is education versus lives. So if that time must be created, then we must also create isolation centers within every school. Then that becomes more practical than being too rigid and chest thumping and saying that on the 4th of January we must open schools. It will not happen if the measures are not as practical as they are. This is the same CS who told us that on the 6th of June we'll be opening schools. He gave us another date, and he is continuing the same rhetoric. It will be it will be misguiding of him to continue doing that. Then he will lose his job, I tell you.
I think one of the things that we are seeing with Magoha is that he's desperate to be right, which is very dangerous. If you have a constant desperation to be right all the time, and no one else who has a contrary opinion appears to be on your side, then I think that is unfortunate for a person who is leading a ministry of this magnitude.